Hello, everyone, and good morning. It is January 19th, and I am here today to talk about the sun's time in Aquarius during 2021. So that will be from January 19th to February 18th when the sun goes into Pisces. So we've made it through Capricorn season, which is the season that straddles the change of the year in our current calendar system. And we've come to Aquarius season. And this year, perhaps more than others, Aquarius season is really the time that brings us into the main storylines of 2021. The dynamics at play right now will be worked over several times, again and again throughout the year, all the way until the very end of the year. So all the way through the end of December. So we're here firmly at the beginning and feeling these tensions, and they feel strained and they feel heightened, and there's a lot at stake. There always is when we're in the throes of a world changing. And the cycles that shifted in 2020, bringing us into new time, also bring us into a liminal time between two epochs. So with the great conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn now occurring in air signs for the next 200 years or so, 180, 200 years, we're moving into a new way of being in the world and a new approach to what it means to be humans and relate to both our expansive nature and the restrictive natures of reality. And so any kind of changeover, any kind of revolution, any kind of cycles of power and understanding can be quite jarring to live through. And so 2021 and even 2022 as well. And then there's a bunch of outer planets that change in 2023 and 2024. So let's just say the next half a decade promises to be quite tumultuous. And this year, we have 3 squares between Saturn and Uranus. And the first one happens in Aquarius season. And these squares will bring about change, and they will also signify the resistance to change. And so we can feel where brittle things will fracture this year, internally, communally, globally. And right, when things get rigid, we see their shadows. And when we demand that things change too fast, we see our shadows. And so this year, I imagine there will be violence, and not necessarily physical violence, although I mean, we live in the world, there's always that. But there will be changes that are fast and hard and unpredictable, and certain things will be destroyed, and certain things there will be a context made for them, and so they'll start creating themselves. But it's going to happen probably in a jarring way. So this is not the change that comes through careful diplomacy. This is the change that comes really with that sense of demanding. And in Aquarius season, we enter that. Because now that we have this square set up and built, and Jupiter last week, a couple days ago on the 17th, made that square with Uranus. Jupiter only has one exact square with Uranus, but it kind of brings us into the 3 that Saturn and Uranus will have. We enter this time where anything moving through a fixed sign, and we've had this for a couple years. So since Uranus went into Taurus in 2018, we've had anything entering in a fixed sign making a hard aspect. So a square, which has to do with conflict, or an opposition, which has to do with kind of a stalemate, or a conjunction, which is a combining of energies and kind of a fusion. So anytime a planet or the sun or the moon has entered Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, or Scorpio, it's come into hard aspect with Uranus. And what's different this year is that Saturn is in Aquarius. So now there will be a wrestling whenever the planets enter those signs of making hard aspects with both Uranus and Saturn, which will keep the dynamic of their square active for the whole year. And so when things come into contact with Uranus, they want sudden change, they want rebellion, they want extreme action. When things come into contact with Saturn, they become restricted or limited, sometimes melancholic, though less so with Saturn in Aquarius. And so you can start to hear this theme building of those that rigidly want revolution and those that rigidly want to keep things the same are going to get triggered repeatedly again and again. And those 2 pieces are also reflected in our own nature. So the part that wants everything to change really, really quickly, and the part that wants things to stay the same or to change in predictable ways. Saturn rules cause and effect, whereas Uranus rules the earthquake, right? And what's that quotation? No one wins a war any more than anyone wins an earthquake, right? When there's that amount of jarring motion, we can't predict what will happen. And Saturn is trying to steady the course. Or, right, if we take a harsher view, prevent that from happening. So that's really the tension of 2021. And during Aquarius season, we get all of the visible planets in the sky, except for Mars. So everything you can see, all of the planets you can see with the naked eye. The sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. So everybody except for Mars will be in Aquarius, and they will move through their squares with Uranus and Taurus. And so we get this first kind of, in Aquarius season, we have this first square. We'll feel this square again when we get to these personal planets entering Taurus season at the end of April. Only then they'll be in Taurus squaring Aquarius, so from the other side. And then we'll get it again at the end of July when we have, or really mid-July, when we have things in Leo. They'll oppose Aquarius and they'll square Taurus, and then we'll have it again in Scorpio season. So we've got these repetitive processes. And then to kind of fill in the blanks, we have Saturn making the first square to Uranus on February 17th. The second one occurs on June 14th. So right in a bunch of other stuff that's going on in June. June's very busy, but we'll get there eventually. And then finally, the third square on December 24th. So that's a lot of this year has the charge of these squares. And they're in fixed signs, and fixed signs are really about digging their heels in. So yeah, we can expect a lot of friction. So if you're feeling tension inside yourself, in your relationships, in your relationship with the world, which is part internal dialogue and part interaction, you are not alone. It's very appropriate, right? Kind of inside of all of us is the whisperings or the beginnings of revolution. And some parts of us are frightened, and some parts of us are grumpy, and some parts of us are angry, and some parts of us are excited to see what change can come about. So without further ado, let's get into the nuts and bolts of this now that you've been given the wide view of the future. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about this. When we begin, we're kind of in the last gasp of the first quarter of the lunar month. So tomorrow on January 20th, the moon will form a waxing square to the sun. So the moon will move into Taurus and square the sun in Aquarius. And so the moon and the sun will make this kind of overall square feel very personal. They also bring us into the part of the month that is engaged with what is outside of us and around us. And if you're in the United States, this is also Inauguration Day. So we'll see the transfer of power and the complications that arise. I mean, obviously we've been seeing that, but a continuation, and now the story will be told from the opposite side. We have Jupiter still separating from its square to Uranus. And I mentioned in my newsletter and in my Capricorn season video, that being a kind of Pandora's box. What's in here? Let's let everything out. And I think we've been seeing a little bit of that. And so, I mean, Jupiter kind of bringing the promise of the brave new world, and Uranus saying, okay, but it has to be grounded in reality because we're in Taurus. And Taurus things are hurting. The pandemic is hurting Taurus things. Our sense of safety, our sense of our ability to survive financially, to provide for ourselves and our families. And Jupiter, it's like, okay, I have all of these new ideas. I'm the Biden administration and I'm going to fix all of these things and you'll see it. And Uranus says, no, now. And we're building up to Mars-Uranus conjunction, which also happens tomorrow. And so I included this in where we currently are because we're feeling the tension of this Mars-Uranus conjunction approaching. And in some ways it feels a little bit like holding your breath. So there's lots of tension in our bodies as this thing is building because we don't know what's going to happen. And when Mars, the warrior and the planet of the will, comes into contact with revolutionary Uranus, we can see these of explosive revolutionary acts. Now it's in Taurus, so not the most warlike sign, but a sign that's very concerned with survival and can defend itself if it feels threatened. So the demographics that feel backed into corners, this could be a flashpoint, right? Where the bull of Taurus and Mars and Taurus can sometimes be sleepy. It's all about inertia. So if it is going strong, it's going to keep going strong. If it is docile, it's going to try to stay docile. But if it feels threatened, it's going to react with full force, and Taurus has a lot of force. And I say these things not to be a harbinger of doom or to be scary at all, but just so that, right, we can notice them in ourselves, we can reflect on them outside of us, and we can begin to kind of ride the tides of time, of qualitative time, how things change. And right, seeing them and being able to accept their existence allows us to actually work with them in creative and constructive ways. Or even if things don't go our way, we can look back and get some perspective, and tease out the lessons or the meanings or, the personal relevance that grounds us in the story of our lives. Okay, so the big storylines. I have gone over most of these. We're going to have Mars conjoin Uranus tomorrow. We'll have a Sun-Saturn conjunction, which is the renewal of Saturn's tasks. Also, we haven't had the Sun conjoin Saturn in Aquarius, so this will be our first one of those of several to come. I believe we'll have 3 total over the next 2 years. We'll have a Leo full moon later next week. We have a Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, so the first Mercury retrograde of the year. Venus will move into Aquarius. We'll have an Aquarius stellium. So as I said, when all of the visible planets are in Aquarius, around the Aquarius New Moon, which happens on February 11th, we have a lot of very heady Aquarian energy. And so it's going to be, we're probably going to feel a little bit dissociated with that much in a very heady air sign. We'll have the Aquarius New Moon, which I think is a beautiful lunation. Venus and Jupiter conjoin during the Aquarius New Moon, so we have both of our benefics together at the beginning of the Aquarian cycle. So that I think will be a real treat after some kind of, we had an eclipse Sagittarius new moon, we had a Scorpio new moon, that was a little bit fraught, and then we had a Capricorn new moon conjunct Pluto, so it's nice to have a new moon that looks uplifting. And then we'll have the first Saturn-Uranus square. Okay, so here's what the energy of Aquarius season looks like. We enter Aquarius season just about at the first quarter moon. As I said, the first quarter moon happens on the 20th, so the day after. We build up towards a Leo full moon, which occurs on January 28th, and then we start integrating lessons, working stuff, winding down, cleaning up. We go into the 4th quarter and wind down towards a Aquarius new moon that happens on February 11th. Renew the storyline and start moving up into a new lunar month, and then we will switch into Pisces season just before the first quarter moon. So here's what we're looking at for transits. So as I said, we're still in the first quarter of the lunar month, but just for kind of the first inhalation of the sun into Aquarius. And then we're in the second quarter. So I know that these might not look like a ton of transits, but they are very potent. So we have Mars conjoining Uranus. I already talked a little bit about that. But this is really kind of the powder keg that brings us into Aquarius season. It's been building for a long time. Remember, Mars spent nearly 7 months in Aries. It entered Taurus on January 6th on the afternoon where the Capitol was stormed. And so there was a debate about whether that was the final degree of Aries that stormed the Capitol, or whether it was Mars heading into Taurus. I can kind of see the value of either of those perspectives and the merit to them. But this is really, Mars in Taurus wants to fight about land, wants to fight about practical things. The problem with when you do that is that you tend to destroy the things that you're fighting for. And so we'll see what happens. You know, we've been hearing about all of the troops. I think it's 20,000 National Guard amassed in DC, about lockdowns, about extra security kind of all over the US with regards to protecting that. And so that's kind of this Saturnian protective force trying to keep the peace, worried about Mars conjoining Uranus. Then we have on the 23rd, Mars square to Jupiter and the Sun conjoining Saturn. So in some ways, these are kind of opposite energies. Mars is square to Jupiter. Whatever Jupiter touches, it can make bigger. So it can really kind of enrage the warrior or inspire the warrior or convince them that they are on a holy mission, on a crusade, right? To lend the kind of zealousness to the crusade. While at the same time, the Sun conjoins Saturn. The Sun being our sense of purpose and our work in the world and our drive to self-actualize comes together with Saturn with that feeling of constriction or limitation, or just merely the knowledge that things take time. So right when Mars is squaring Jupiter and we have this kind of rush of energy to do, the Sun is a little bit more reflective and integrating these kind of lessons about wider expanses of time and what's actually possible. And in the sense that the Sun can represent kind of the father or the king and or the ruler, and that Biden will be president at this point. This could be a time when he really faces the amount of work at his feet, or there's some kind of constriction around then. From that conjunction with Saturn, the Sun will move to a square with Uranus on the 26th. Right? So it's almost like the Sun tunes in with Saturn, like, okay, this is what is possible. We're going to color within the lines. We're going to play by the rules. You know, like, we're going to fix the system from inside the system. Okay. And then it hits that square to Uranus and it's like, can't do it. I'm going to rebel. I'm going to make a hard left. I'm going to change the plans that I just agreed on with Saturn. And so, right? So we're feeling that square. Hitting the idealism of Aquarius and saying, I cannot compromise. And that's a big feeling of these squares too. Compromising would feel like defeat, possibly. Then the Leo full moon on the 28th will bring us into the third quarter of the lunar month. So that Sun square to Uranus, just before, it's almost at the peak of emotional tension of the month. And that also means that Uranus is going to square that full moon. So it's going to be a really tense full moon. It is The moon will be opposite to Jupiter, so the sun will be very close to a conjunction with Jupiter. It will be square to Uranus, still in a square to Mars. And then in the background, Venus will be conjoining Pluto. So that is, it's big. And so I will discuss that at length in my Leo full moon video, which you can look for on my channel a few days before that full moon. But it's big, it's bright, there's a lot at stake, and there's a lot that can happen. The energy is very dynamic. It can go a lot of different ways. There will be lots of ego involved, probably. Yeah. And that will turn the corner and things will start to wind down following that full moon, because we'll be in the third quarter of the month. So we have just a couple days after that, Mercury stationing retrograde. So thus far in Aquarius season, Mercury has been in the pre-shadow of the retrograde. So from January 15th until January 30th, Mercury is moving over the degrees, which they will retrograde back over. I use non-binary pronouns for Mercury because that's Mercury. So they will retrograde from the 30th until February 20th. So basically all of Aquarius season, we have some version of Mercury in a retrograde-y space. And I think it would not be accurate to think of this Mercury retrograde as Mercury somehow like, messing things up or being irrelevant to the drama that is occurring, right? With this many planets in Aquarius and this much tension in Aquarius, it would make a lot of sense for us to be rethinking a lot of Aquarian things. And so Mercury will retrograde from, where does Mercury station? Stations retrograde from 26.5 degrees of Aquarius and will retrograde back to 11 degrees. So basically the second half of Aquarius is getting reevaluated by Mercury. So wherever that falls in your chart, there's going to be typical Mercury stuff. But I would invite you into that space to explore your sense of the blueprints of that space of your chart, because it's going to get a lot of work this year. So we'll have this beautiful Mercury retrograde that happens. And then after that, Jupiter is going to transit that space and expand our sense of what it could be. Then over the next 2 years, Saturn is going to demand that we work hard in that space. And so there's this kind of vision quest quality to Mercury retrograde in Aquarius this year, right? We're going inward or we're going outward, whatever. We're turning off the TV or whatever is normally entertaining our Mercury to really find, I think it was Proust said, true discovery doesn't lie in like finding new lands, but in having new eyes. This Mercury retrograde is about finding new eyes. And right, so there's one way which we can just be frustrated about the way things are and frustrated about our inability to move forward, or criticizing the way everyone is doing everything. Or we can find new eyes. It is us that will envision the new world that we want to create, that will envision our new selves that we want to create. How, there's this concept in counseling, or at least the counseling that I was trained in, that support precedes change. If you want someone to change, how can you offer the support that would make it possible for them to do so? And so this Mercury retrograde is kind of finding that lay of the land, right? If I want the world to look like this, how can I make it easier for the world to become this new thing than stay this old thing? Most people attack the old thing, which makes it feel threatened, which makes people hold on more tightly to it. Instead of, right, how can we lay down the proverbial picnic blanket and invite the world into a new space, right? How can we make it more alluring? Which also means, how can we make it safe for people to abandon the old world and enter the new one? So I think those are all kind of good questions for this Mercury retrograde. Then we roll into February. And on the first day of February, we get Venus into Aquarius and the Sun square to Mars. So Venus into Aquarius, I think will be really nice, because now we have kind of the social adeptness to walk around in this strange Aquarian alien world. She can bring more curiosity and appreciation to it. And kind of this human connection and human warmth. Although I don't think that warmth is really the word for Venus in Aquarius. I think it looks a lot more like permissiveness and respect of difference. Or even if it isn't respect, there is the tolerance to Venus in Aquarius. Sun squares Mars, so the sense of what we're doing is going to come into a little bit of conflict with our ability to do it, our capacity to do it, what Mars feels like doing in Taurus. Maybe Mars wants to take a nap and the Sun wants to build Aquarius's brave new world. So there can be a little bit of feelings of tension, possibly of exhaustion there. And that will make sense. This is a big lunar cycle of exciting things. So if we're tired entering the darker phases of the moon, that is going to be right kind of in sync. Here's the Leo full moon. So you can look for this cover of my video that will come out about that full moon. So then on February 4th, we will enter the fourth quarter. So that happens when the moon forms a waning square to the sun in the mid-morning on the 4th. And so the moon will be in Scorpio, and it will be moving towards the new moon in Aquarius. So it forms that waning square and brings us into the dark part of the lunar month. So the few days that follow this fourth quarter square are really where we work to make peace and let go and finish things up. They're really good days for creativity and reflection, as a way of kind of making peace with things. Great days for cleaning the house, getting rid of stuff, making amends with any kind of conflict that we've come into, possibly. just some things to think about. That Scorpio moon can really help you get right at the heart of issues and kind of give you the capacity, if you're a more sensitive person, to be able to say what you mean in a less circuitous way. That's the gift of that Scorpio moon, is getting right to the heart of things. So then on Saturday, we have Venus conjoining Saturn. I love Venus-Saturn contact. And I think it's because Venus softens Saturn. I mean, Saturn can be very limiting of Venus, and so it's not that we have kind of blinders on about that, but right here we have kind of the values and the love and the wishes kind of pounded into reality, right? So now they have this check-in point, which will limit them, but it also makes them more real. So yeah, let's get things a little bit more practical. But then very quickly, because she moves faster than, than most things, she will square Uranus. So first thing, so her conjunction with Saturn happens around midnight. And then by the next evening, so by 8:30, she's going to square Uranus. So again, this kind of checking in, okay, we're coming down to Earth, whatever, or we're being blasted into the alien world of Aquarius, and seeing things from way up high and thinking about time in huge increments. And then all of a sudden we run smack into Uranus. What do we need to make that happen? And we want to make it happen faster than Saturn will let it. So we've got Venus tangled in that square. So far, right, we've had the sun go through it, we've had Venus go through it, we've had Mars go through it from the Taurus end. We've had Mercury go through it, but Mercury went through it in Capricorn. It'll do it again because of its retrograde later in the month. And then on Monday, we have the cazimi of the sun and retrograde Mercury at 20 degrees of Aquarius. So the cazimi is kind of the midpoint of the retrograde. It is that kind of moment where we transition from Mercury kind of to use an alchemical term, from like the solve position, from the dissolving of predominant thoughts and beliefs. And this is where it kind of gets the sense of the gold it can become. And then the rest of the retrograde is the forging of that gold. So you still don't have Mercury back in terms of a fine-tuned tool, but this is usually the turning point in the retrograde of kind of seeing the folly of all of your false beliefs, and then you get the clear vision. And you're not out of the woods, but you have had the vision. So that happens on the 8th. And then on the 10th, we will have retrograde Mercury square Mars. So now Mercury is getting back into the land of all of these squares. And so we had one Mercury-Mars square that happened in Capricorn season when Mercury was direct, Mars was direct. They squared. And this is the second one, but now Mercury is going back on the deal, or the tension, or coming back to make amends. They will make a third square to each other, but it will not be until March, and by then Mars will be in Gemini and Mercury will be in Pisces. And so the argument that they are currently having is not going to be resolved without both of them moving into a new space. So this can be quite heated. This can be a breaking point of relationships. This can be, yeah, there can be some temper, certainly stalemating, because Mercury is our communication and Mars is how we use our will. And so that can happen, you know, that will just be in the air, but we can feel that inside of ourselves, and interpersonally as well. I'm hoping that, another way to interpret the retrograde is that it's happening so close to the new moon that we may be too exhausted really to do anything. And so we don't actually take the action until we get closer to their final square, which I think happens on March 2nd or something, very close to the beginning of March. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, but we reach that internal breaking point, but because we're in the balsamic moon, we don't take action until later. Okay, so then we have that Aquarius new moon. Again, I'll post a video about it. I'm excited for this new moon because because there is a Venus-Jupiter conjunction on that day, and so there will be, that it doesn't aspect the new moon exactly, but it is, it'll be in the lunation chart, and I think that will just be really nice. Venus together with Jupiter means it's good for all the night charts and all the day charts. And so hopefully that will bring some hope, hope grounded, and, there's still a co-presence with Saturn. It's not going to be off the wall, but hopefully we will find things that we can look forward to that will culminate around the Aquarius full moon, which will happen on July 23rd at 1 degree of Aquarius. So yeah, I'll talk more about that in my Aquarius new moon video. On the 13th, Venus conjoins a retrograde Mercury. So now Mercury is having a conference with Venus about how our values are changing, how what we want is changing, how we need more freedom in our relationships, how we need to spend more money on social justice. All of these things are a possibility, and many more. But right, Venus, our sense of values, the significator of money and relationships, is having a conversation with Mercury, who is reconsidering a bunch of things in Aquarius land. Then on Valentine's Day, we have a retrograde Mercury conjunct Jupiter. So now, right, these two these planets that are opposite each other in some ways, Mercury breaking things down into their smallest pieces, Jupiter uniting everything through beliefs or the sense of unity, come together to figure out what we've made so far with Aquarius. And so that, I imagine, will be a really good day for writing if you're feeling overwhelmed, if all of these planets in Aquarius have you feeling a little bit dissociated, a little bit out of your body. To stay grounded during that transit, I would write, or I would paint, or some kind of self-expression to kind of let all of these twittering thoughts find a space. And then we have on the 17th, Saturn square to Uranus. And I've talked a lot about that. I think we'll see what happens. I'm sure lots of other astrologers will have plenty to say about Saturn square to Uranus. And, you know, with some of these big overarching things, especially with planets that are more, Saturn is sometimes called a social planet, whereas Uranus is a transpersonal planet. They're far away. They mark bigger sections of time. So it's not necessarily something explodes in your life. It can be the political realm around us. It can be the time that we're living through and the way that that feels to us in our bodies, the way that the moon is bringing that into our awareness. So we'll see. And I'll probably be talking about that Saturn square to Uranus and what has happened around then more in the Pisces season video, because it happens on the eve of Pisces season. So yeah, thank you for listening to my video on the Aquarius season transits. If you like this video, be sure to like it, subscribe to my channel if you want to check out future videos. February and Aquarius season are not the most romantic of seasons, so it's funny that we have Valentine's Day there, but they are a great time, especially with all this Aquarius, to think about relationships and be able to do it in an objective and practical way. So I'm offering $20 off on all relationship readings, so that they don't have to be romantic. It can be your mom, it can be your dog, it can be your dead grandfather. So I'm offering $20 off on relationship readings through Valentine's Day. If you book before Valentine's Day, so it doesn't have to happen before then, but just book it before then. And you can find all the information about that on my website. I wish you all the best. I hope you hold on to your hats this season. And I'll check in with you at the lunations.